This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington. Welcome to the Late Boomers podcast. Today, our special guest is New York veteran talent agent and casting director, Albert Bramante. He is also the author of Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Albert defies the conventional image we may have of a talent agent. He's also a doctor of psychology and hypnotherapist who works to empower performers to overcome psychological barriers and achieve success. Welcome, Albert, or shall I say welcome, Doctor.
Yeah. Well, I first want to thank you both for having me on the show. I'm really happy to be here. And I was really looking forward all week to having this conversation with you both.
Good.
Us too.
Important.
We are too. Thank you. What gave you the idea to fuse your work as a talent agent and psychologist? And tell us how your background led you to this unique career choice.
Yeah, well, I never really intended to be a talent agent. That was like not in the that was not even in the entertainment industry at all.
Oh.
So I was, since high school, I really was intent on becoming a clinical psychologist. That was like my life path. And but I was also into creative art. So when I was involved in the drama club in high school, and then my undergrad career, I took some acting and theater classes as electives. And I really enjoyed the process. So I then decided to, as I was going through my master's degree, I happened to land an unlikely internship with one of the New York staple talk shows at the time. So working mainly with outreach and crisis counseling and aftercare. And that was with the Sally Jesse Raphael show.
Oh.
Uh-huh. Remember her? Sure.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, everybody remembers Sir Sally. And it was
red glasses, right? Red
glasses, red hair.
Yeah.
It was a learning experience. I'll say that, an eye-opening experience. But that kind of gave me my first exposure into the entertainment industry.
What did you
think? And we can have a whole show on that. It was. It was amazing at the same time to watch, but also very disturbing at the same time. Like after that experience, I vowed to never want to work in talk shows ever again. But it was also, now that looking back into it, it was kind of the norm, the way it works. And I think for me I was only 24 at the time, so I was like naive and thinking that, these hosts really care about the guests.
Yeah.
Not so much. And pretty much what really kind of, I guess, solidified things was like Sally was reading from the teleprompter and had an earpiece of like feeding her what to say, what questions to ask, what comments to make. So everything was scripted, which a lot of people who wouldn't know that if they don't work in there. It seems like she's just off the cuff, but everything is scripted. And a lot of the guests were surprised at that, because they would try to talk to Sally when the cameras weren't rolling, and she wasn't really having it. So what I think the biggest wake-up call or eye-opening thing with me was the concept of persona and the real person can be completely different things.
Interesting.
In TV. The persona that we see versus Sally as the real person were a little bit different.
Like a split personality. too.
Yes, which
Yeah.
is most of how the business works. And
Mhm.
so, fast forward after the internship was over, I kept in contact with the person that was the aftercare specialist at the time.
Mhm.
And right around when 9/11 happened, she's like, I need some help with starting an organization called Operation Healing America in New York to work with rescue workers, to work with um, doing some crisis intervention work. And we're going to work with some actors, helping some actors do some outreach because she was the aftercare specialist, but she was also an actress too, a screen act, it's
Mhm.
like after. So I started being friends with other actors and realized I like this. And so I did a little bit of stint of myself as an actor.
Mm.
And it wasn't for me, but I liked being around actors. I liked being around creative people. That's what gave me energy. I really wasn't feeling comfortable with other academia types. It
Mhm.
was too stuffy for me, that type of environment.
Right.
So I didn't, but I identified more with actors. So I did some soul searching when I realized kind of like acting is not for me. So I came into why don't I support actors? Why don't I first be an advocate? And then I decided, why don't I represent actors? And so 2004, I started my first company. And while at that time, I also made a promise to my family that I was going to get a PhD.
Mm.
And so I decided I might as well go back to school. I'm already halfway there, already had my master's. So I then went for started my PhD program. Now, what got me to blend the two together was as I was starting my talent business and started working with actors, one pattern that kept coming up was these actors were self-sabotaging.
That was my next question to you. Because talking about self sabotaging their own careers, so what is that what led you to connect self sabotage with the challenges that are faced by performing artists?
Yeah, I mean, because I one thing that I was noticing, and I kept banging my head against the wall proverbially, was the fact that these actors were telling me how much they wanted to work and how much they wanted to audition. Yet every time I would
Mhm.
get them appointments, they were not. They come up with excuses. They come up with reasons why they can't do it, or they would sometimes just decide not to show up at all
Wow.
Oh,
to an audition.
brother.
And I
The
couldn't figure
biggest
out what
nightmare. That's the biggest
that's.
nightmare for an agent. I've
Yes,
been an actor for a long time. Yeah.
yeah. And what I couldn't figure out, I'm like, there's so many actors that would be killing for this appointment that you got, and
Mhm.
you're not treating it well. So, but yet these were the same actors that were complaining to me a week before how much they wanted to work. There was no auditions, and I'm like, well, I'm getting you them, and you're not. So, and this was
Mm.
a problem, not just with one, but with several.
Hmm.
So, when I was in the midst of my PhD program, we had to come up with a dissertation topic because the
Mhm.
dissertation is like a monumental thesis, which is that it's a capstone to get into PhD. So the advice that we received was to pick a real problem that you faced, and what's up with these damn actors was kind of like going in my mind.
Yeah, I was going to ask, why do you think that is? What causes that?
So, and when I mentioned it to my advisor, like this is a great topic because there's not a lot written in the literature about creative people and
Yeah.
actors. So great. So my dissertation was on self-defeating behavior in performing artists.
Mm.
Oh. How many
So
words do you write in a piece like that?
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. It was the size of a book. I would say between 35 and 40,000.
Wow.
Wow.
I hope
Yeah, this was unlike any paper I've written. This was at least 200 pages.
Mhm.
It
Wow.
wow.
was a one thing that like I'm really glad I do get the PhD, but I'm never doing that again. I'm done. I did it once because there's some people that are like, oh, I have 2 or 3 PhDs. I'm like, no, one is enough.
It's a marathon.
So it is a
Yeah.
marathon, and it's a process.
Mhm.
So that was so my project, my theme was self-defeating behavior in performing artists. So I several years later, after I started my PhD, I was like, I might as well turn this into a book.
Oh,
I mean,
right.
wrote a lot.
What's one piece of advice you would give to an actor who feels overwhelmed by self-doubt and is considering leaving the performing arts?
Well, I would say to reconnect, like the first thing I would ask them is like, why did you become an actor?
Mm-hmm.
And really start talking about the feeling that come with that. So using a little bit of body work, where is it in your body? How does it feel? When what made you really want to become an actor?
What kind of answers did you get?
I want to perform. I want to tell stories. I like helping other people. I want to inspire others. Okay, great. Yeah. So let's go to that. And the one thing that there's a lot of things that you can do, like mental hacks and things with with working, improving your mindset, because mindset is extremely important. The one thing going back to the marathon, this is a marathon. This is not a quick fix. This is not going to be an overnight. The overnight success stories they can happen, but they're very rare. Very, very rare. And a lot of times what they don't tell you in these overnight success stories, that they were working for 10 or 15 years behind the scenes as an actor.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
They just happened to be at that moment that they just became a household name from nowhere. But they were working maybe 15, 20 years prior to them getting major stardom. So
especially the ones that make it in their early 20s, they've already been childhood actors on set their whole lives.
Yeah, on set their lives, and or they don't. Some actors like Morgan Freeman really didn't hit it big until he was last quarter of life. Last third of his life. In his 50s and 60s. That. So, and sometimes it happens with a lot of actors that they don't. It takes a long time, and some of my actors, especially because I have from kids to all the way mature up into the 80s. I have actors in my roster that are in their 80s. What I've seen a lot, especially with some of the more senior actors, is a lot of times they take breaks. So like they may have been acting in their 20s and early 30s, and then they had a family, had children, and then took maybe 15 to 18-year break to raise their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And now the kids are grown or in high school or even in college. Oh, let me go back now. Let me go back and pursue my dreams. So the one thing that's important is just to really the mindset of that this is going to take a long time. And what I feel is lacking in a lot of these drama schools is that awareness and teaching that especially these young kids, that it's a marathon. It's going to take a while. You're not going to just be graduating, moving to New York or LA with starry eyes and thinking, okay, I'm going to be on Broadway or I'm going to be a lead in a TV series. It's not, it may, no, for sometimes it might happen for the unicorn at one and a couple million chances where that may happen. But most of the time, 99.9% of the time, it's going to take a few years minimum before you can see any little traction. So I think that should be really being taught and reinforced in the beginning of the studies rather than because I see a lot of these young 21, 22-year-olds, hitting the ground market, moving to New York, moving to LA with bright eyes.
Yeah.
And it's great, but it's not going to work that way. You have to work hard, and it's a profession that built on relationships and you have and it's longevity. So that's the one thing I would really reinforce that this is a longevity. This is not a sprint. This is not going to be a quick thing. What I would also do is kind of reframing. So using a little hypnosis, waking hypnosis, is to reframe some things. So one of the things I hear a lot from especially people that either want to be actors or just thinking about actors, they'll say to me, I really want to be an actor, but I don't like all the rejection. And I think that word is a misnomer because when you're, it's not rejection. Number one, rejection would be personal. It's not personal. It's a business.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not going to be right for that role.
Yeah.
There's hundreds of actors sometimes auditioning for the same role. Only one of them can get it.
Right.
And only 30% of it is your performance. So you can give a really great audition, but you may not be the producer or writer or director's vision of that character.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
what you can control is to give that 30, 40% in your favor by doing, a fantastic job.
Yeah. But you know what else I heard is that there's a lot of people who were actors and they became like producers, directors, heads of studios, whatever. I mean, there's so many areas to pursue for actors. But I'd like to ask you a question about your book, Rise Above the Script. I know you've told us a little bit about it, but talk about what the happy file is and what you use it for to boost self-esteem and motivation. And what is it?
So, well, it's really the whole purpose of it is to remain connected to why you're doing this. So it's an actual sort of like another name for a gratitude journal in a sense.
Oh.
So you keep a journal, and every day you document things that you're grateful for. Not only that, but you take as an actor, like I said, the book was written in this context for actors. So let's say you give a great performance on an audition, you get a good feedback from the casting director, you get good feedback in an acting class from your fellow acting student, colleagues in the class or the acting teacher. You document that. You get a call back, which is like a second audition. You get to kind of invited back to audition again from your first audition. That's a win, a callback.
Mm-hmm.
So you document that. Even if you're putting them what we call in the mix or on hold, which means it's a great thing. It may not lead to a booking. A hold may not lead to a booking, or the saying goes, you're in the mix. It may not lead to a booking, but it's still a great thing. You already made a huge step forward. That should go in your happy file.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing a theater performance and you get a good review, or an audience member comes up to you and says, your work inspired me, that should go in your happy file. So now when you start to have those moments of self-doubt, pull out the happy file.
Ah.
Oh, I love that.
I like that plan. That plan. Mm-hmm. Having done all this myself, I really relate to what you're saying because I've been an actor since I was a teenager. So, I mean, I know all of that and all of what goes into it. And you really speak the truth.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And that's, it just keeps you connected to your why. In a sense, don't lose focus of that. So that's definitely something that I would say is important to do. And I also like to turn around and use a statement that I've heard, and I can't take credit for this, but I've heard a quote that really inspires me, and I think it works well for actors. There's no such thing as rejection. It's just a gentle reminder that your services are not needed today.
Mm-hmm. That's the operating word.
The key word is today, and also it makes it less personal. Because right now your acting services are not needed for this type of character, this job. Okay, so that next, and if you keep that mentality into it, and one thing I also do when working with hypnosis is there's a process called that's really important. It's activating your imagination.
Mm.
Your imagination is very powerful. Yeah. It's a very powerful vehicle.
Do you work with hypnosis with your clients very often?
Indirectly, like I really don't call it. Most of the time, a lot of people get nervous when they hear the word hypnosis.
Yeah,
which it does get a bad reputation. There is that negative reputation in the associated with that. Like you're gonna make people act weird and mind control them, which is totally not what it is. It's the complete opposite of that. So, but one thing to do is to activate your imagination. So, one thing I will say is like, okay, recall a time where something was very powerful for you. what was it where you really achieved something great? Okay, what did that feel like? And then their eyes and ears would light up. They would say that it feels great. Where do you feel in your body? Okay, and most of them chest, stomach, or different areas. Okay, now imagine yourself giving that audition and bring those feelings back from that previous experience. And just keep doing that over and over again. Keep visualizing that, imagining, just giving this really dynamic audition. The lines are going flawlessly. You're taking direction well. Because the one thing about the human brain and human mind, it does not know the difference between imagination and reality.
Yeah.
So,
well, talk to us a little bit about the fear of failure. You discuss that in your book. How can artists, or for that matter, anyone, reframe their view of failure and think of it as a stepping stone rather than a setback?
Well, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. That's one of the truths I kind of
feedback.
Say. So, even if you make a mistake, that's part of being the human experience. We're going to make mistakes. Every one of us makes mistakes constantly. But if we use those as feedback and learning experiences, they get us closer to success than they do to failure. So the important thing is to look at failure as feedback, as important feedback and important learning experiences to how you can grow and become better the next time. And that's one way to look at that, because especially no one wants to fail. But if you look at it like, okay, I'm learning, I'm a work in progress.
I think we're always a work in progress, no matter how old we are.
No matter how old we are, exactly.
Yeah. So, how does looking at and understanding the personality traits of famous people, of celebrities, and people who are known as fine actors, how did the traits, the personality traits that they have, help artists who are trying to get work, or even who work a little bit in their professional and personal lives?
Well, there's a couple, right? In my book, I mentioned a model called the Big Five, the 5-factor model, which is universal traits of openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So, openness to be.
What was the last one? I couldn't understand the last one.
Neuroticism. To be a neuroticism. Yeah, that's that word.
Okay.
So,
yeah, okay.
Openness is important because obviously to be creative, you have to be open-minded.
Yeah.
And you have to be open to new ideas and open to trying out new things. So that's the heart of creativity, is doing things differently. So you have to be open-minded. One thing that I noticed, especially in my doctoral research, a lot of actors lack the conscientiousness and discipline focus. That's extremely important. Discipline, focus, being conscientious, hardworking. So you want to be hardworking, you want to be disciplined enough. So that means, keeping a planner, being focused in a sense, and having a good work ethic. Because that's the biggest predictor of success in any industry, to be conscientious. You also have to be agreeable to some level, because that's being coachable, being trainable, being open to taking direction, being open to be critiqued. Because as an actor, you're going to be sometimes given redirections a lot, or even critiqued and say, this, you may have to do it this way or do this performance in this way. And I think in order to be successful, you have to be open to changing that and not get offended when someone offers you a critique. Because I've noticed that too sometimes. We're working with actors. You tell them this is an adjustment, they get really offended because I thought they worked hard. They're like, I don't understand. This is the way I do things. No, you have to be willing to be adaptable and coachable.
Yeah, flexibility.
Right.
And then there also has to be a bit of extroversion too. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be the life of the party, but a lot of actors that I know are introverted by nature. So I think it's important to network. So to talk to people. So there has to be a little bit of extroversion there. And then the last trait is neuroticism, and that refers to how easily phased you are. How do you get anxiety very easily? Do you get flustered easily? So what we can do to work with that is we want to increase conscientiousness, but lower the temperature on neuroticism,
Hmm.
because that's a recipe for self-sabotage, and that kept coming up in my doctoral research over and over again. High neuroticism and low conscientiousness.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, how do you differentiate between toxic high self-esteem and healthy self-esteem? And why is that important?
Well, healthy self-esteem is humility, but still thinking highly of yourself and still being humble. Like, you don't think you're better than anybody else, and but you still celebrate your wins, and you still look at yourself as deserving and worthy. But you don't. It's not like I'm better than you, or you look at people in a condescending way. So toxic high self-esteem is often related to low self-esteem, because some people will like walk around with a grandiosity, like I'm a or like I'm from Juilliard, for instance, and I'm better than everybody else in here. Now, the reason why it's called fragile, it's also called fragile self-esteem, because the moment you offer something very critical, they get offended fast. How dare you say this about me? Don't you know I'm trained and I'm the best? And then what winds up happening is that's a form of self-sabotage, because no one's going to want to work with somebody like that, and they're not coachable. So, like, sometimes I would meet, especially with some of the actors, mature actors, who else, I'll ask them, so where are you training at? And they'll tell me, I don't need training. And I'm like,
okay,
I don't need to be working with you.
But you should never stop training.
You should never stop training. You never, and I'm always learning. And I think that's the mentality too of like being humble. Is you're always should be learning. And this is any profession, whether you're an actor, whether you're a writer, a teacher, work in corporate, you should always be learning.
Yeah, I was at a party with some people, and the lawyer there was a woman, and she said, "Oh, in order to be a lawyer, you have to be a student. You always are a student." And of course, that goes true for everything, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I tell people, like, I have a terminal degree, a PhD, but I'm just starting my learning process, not ending. Maybe in a formal sense, I may not be in class again, but I'm still learning daily, and that's the important thing. And that's a big difference, because usually people that have that inflated self or grandiosity feel like they don't need to learn; they know everything.
Well,
and usually,
would you? I know that your book introduces techniques for raising self-esteem. For those that you haven't mentioned in our conversation, can you give us some more thoughts about that? And also, can you give us a few success stories of people who came in to your orb, shall I say, and you worked with them and they became success stories?
Well, there's two things that I can really recommend to raise self-esteem. One is to hang out or associate yourself with positive people only. So the company that you keep is extremely important. So if you're around negative, toxic people, you're going to get sucked into it, and it'll rub off on you. So that's important. And also doing things that are outside your comfort zone a little bit. Doing things that will make you a little uncomfortable. That's a really good way to raise your self-esteem. And then one other thing I'll mention, I know I said two, but the third one would be do some volunteer charitable work.
Oh, yeah.
So that'll really rate when you help other people. Now, success stories, I can tell you both, even from an educator form as well as from a talent agent side. So I was working for a while. I was kind of like a guest instructor for an acting school in New York, and I teach the mindset and business of acting. I'm not an acting teacher. There's plenty of great teachers that can do that. So there was this one student who actually became a client of mine, who had still has a very successful corporate career. She was a buyer at a major company, and she was kind of having the ranks. When she was not performing, she had a gravitas about her that was very powerful and grounded. When she started acting, it was very weak and very like a submissive tone. And for 9 or 10 years, she just couldn't book. And I kind of suspected that it was that. So with her acting, I kind of worked on getting her to use the gravitas that she already had and just transform into the roles that she was playing. And when she did that, it was like a light bulb went off, and she started booking. So one of the things I can say is anybody who's an actor listening is I've definitely treat the script and the words and honor them, and definitely straight to the word, but always make the work your own. Bring your own experiences into that character.
Yeah,
because that's what's going to make it unique and memorable, rather than thinking this is what you should do.
Yeah.
How would you act in that? So getting her into her own power, in a sense.
That's great.
Well, everybody
Albert,
has a voice.
Yeah. Albert, what would you like our audience to have as a takeaway today?
Just that you're powerful beyond belief. And just my whole thing is that you deserve to be here. You deserve to have a seat at the table. And take action. Don't have to-do lists, because there's a lot of people will say, well, someday I'm going to do this, or someday I'm going to do that. And someday is not a day on the calendar. So
you're right. Someday may not. And don't wait for people to take action for you.
Yeah, exactly. Do it yourself. And don't, this is why I think putting things on a calendar is important than doing a to-do list.
That's great.
Because when you put stuff on the calendar, you take action. It's real.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Writing it down. Yeah. I just have I'm curious about one thing. How difficult is it to get a talent agent in New York?
It depends on what type you are. It also depends upon your experience level. It can be challenging for certain people, now, unless you're a unique type. And I think the reality of it, I'm just going to be completely honest, the younger you are, it's a little easier.
Yeah.
Initially, unless you have the specific brand and type already. So, but there's also a lot of stuff that I can tell you that you don't really need an agent now. You can still do a lot of work on your own as an actor, even if you don't have representation at the moment. So it's much more accessible than it was years ago.
Yeah. Because people make their own TikTok shows and all that stuff.
Exactly. And so collaborate with other actors too. That's the main thing too.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to say thank you, Dr. Bramante. Our guest today on Late Boomers has been Dr. Albert Bramante. You can purchase his book on Amazon, and you can connect with him via his website, albertbramante.com. And I'll spell that, Albert, and then Bramante.com.
And thank you for listening to our Late Boomers podcast and subscribing to our Late Boomers podcast channel on YouTube. Listen in next week when you'll meet another exciting guest, the multi-talented singer-songwriter and actress, Jan Daly. You can listen to Late Boomers on any podcast platform, and we do appreciate you so much. Just please follow us on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. And thanks again to Dr. Albert Bramante.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to ewnpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.